Here in studio, we have another egg producer, Chad Troutman. He's the owner of ChiliTrout Farm in the Kane County village of Burlington. Good to have you on the program, Chad.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks for having me.
Also joining us is Ben Felder, who's editor-in-chief of Investigate Midwest. That's a nonprofit news outlet that reports on agribusiness. Welcome to Reset, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
I'll start with you, Chad. I mean, it must have been both heartbreaking and alarming to hear the interview that I just did with Marty Thomas. You've got 100 hens. You sell 40 to 55 dozen eggs a week. Have any of your hens come down with bird flu?
No, because as Marty pointed out, when it comes hard and fast and just wipes you out, basically.
What about other egg producers near you? Have they had outbreaks? And what are the precautions that you are taking that it's keeping your flock safe?
I haven't heard of any near me, but I have heard of bird flu outbreaks amongst wild, usually waterfowl. As to me personally, I have not a chicken coop, but a chicken barn.
Okay.
So I try to keep the wild birds out for the most part. Occasionally there's little gaps because, it's an older barn where sparrows will slip in and things like that. But as opposed to Marty, I am free range and pasture range also. However, though, I feed all my girls inside because of coyotes and the bad guys issue.
Right.
Coyotes, hawks, things like that. So they go out there to forage for grubs, to eat alfalfa hay, straight off the thing. And also I'm a vegetable producer, so to eat all the fallen vegetables that fall on the ground.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons why mine have a little extra oomph on the flavor. So
I see.
But,
well, I
yes.
understand things could change for you, though, when the weather warms up.
Absolutely.
How does that work?
Because how that will work is during the winter, I do let them go outside, but they're smart. And if it's below 25 degrees, they're not going anywhere, They have the option, though.
Okay.
But during the spring and summer, of course, when it gets above 50, 55 especially, they're out there for all daylight hours. So they will come in contact with wild birds much more often. So if I hear that another flock near me has been affected, then I would have to go out and purchase nets and cover them on poles at all times and have a little portable, which I fortunately do have a little portable nesting area where they can run away just in case there is coyotes or raccoons or things like that are coming after them.
So would you not do that maybe proactively? Purchase the nets and get prepared, knowing how rampant this is right now?
Absolutely, but the margins in my business, especially when you're a small guy like me, are so razor thin. That's hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for something that may or may not happen.
I see.
So, but the one thing is if it does happen, boom, it happens overnight,
Right.
and you got troubles.
Let's bring Ben in here. Ben, what are you hearing about how bird flu's impacting farmers in the Midwest?
Yeah, well, like we just heard, I mean, those margins are very razor thin, and that's a big reality for farmers on the ground. One of the things that we've been following the bird flu epidemic through the poultry industry, obviously over the past year plus, that's been hitting egg-laying flocks a lot harder than broilers, those that are producing for meat. But over this past year, we've seen it jump into dairy herds, and so it's kind of taking on a similar spread that we saw in poultry and still see now in dairy herds, and really impacting milk production in a lot of high dairy producing states. But I think that's the biggest issue that we're seeing as you talk to farmers is just the loss of revenue when flocks are cold or die, but also having to weigh how much do you invest to be proactive when those margins are so thin.
Yeah. Well, as you alluded there, I mean, bird flu is impacting dairy cows as well. So why aren't we seeing increases in milk prices? And why aren't we getting sticker shock from the cost of chicken?
Yeah, great question. So there's lots of answers to that. One is when it comes to comparing poultry and dairy, specifically with egg-laying flocks, it's a lot more of a open supply and demand issue with eggs. So as the supply goes down, the demand goes up. On the dairy side of things, though, there are some federal price controls that kind of keep dairy prices in check. Those are meant to kind of protect dairy farmers who are selling to producers. Obviously, dairy and milk is a highly volatile product, so there is an opportunity that a processor could kind of have the upper hand in those negotiations, since the farmer has to get rid of their dairy so quickly. But those price controls try to alleviate that, and that does provide some relief to shoppers, so consumers. are not seeing those prices go up incredibly. They've only gone up a couple percent nationwide over the past year. But on the flip side, it's really squeezing dairy farmers. So one thing that we're seeing is those federal price controls, which were recently updated to help kind of offset the cost at the retail on the retail side of things,
Yeah.
but they're squeezing dairy farmers even more, who are also having to spend extra money trying to mitigate the spread of the virus. Also, when it comes to dairy, cows are typically not killed if they contract the disease or quarantined. But even when they come back from quarantine, we're finding that the production of that cow is less than it was before.
Right.
And then when you look at the broilers, the meat side of things, they're not getting hit as hard as the egg layers, but there's also some just the way that you sell eggs and meat is different. Obviously, meat can be frozen. The nation's frozen chicken supply has decreased some recently, but it's still
Yeah.
well stocked right now.
Chad, have you had to raise the price of your eggs?
I haven't.
Okay.
I should, and I've been told that by my customers because I used to be on the high end of the organic, free-range, pasture-raised area, but not amongst that quality of egg. I've always been on the cheaper side of those guys.
I see.
But now mine are downright like the Jewels prices, you know. So
gotta
for
come
just
check you
for the
out.
factory, for the factory stuff. So as I always said, though, I want to make it available to everybody, just not the people that have more money, so they can have high-end quality eggs.
Mm-hmm.
However, though, because of the recent money I've been spending, I might have to raise it $1, but that would be temporarily, just for like 2-3 months until I can recover.
So
some
these
of
are
that.
the conversations you have to be
Absolutely, but
having.
mine are $8, and what used to be like a year ago $8. It's a little pricey.
Yeah. Now you
but
got to
still,
probably put it up closer
but
to
now,
10.
yeah, but
Yeah.
now it's like $8. Jesus, they're cheap. That's
Yeah.
why, just as was mentioned previously, I do have to, my restaurants. I say, all right, you only get 5, or my private individuals like 1 or maybe 2 dozen if I know they have a
You
big
start to
family
limit.
per household.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. If you're just tuning in, this is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and we are learning more about how farmers are coping with bird flu. Also, the uncertainty of tariffs and cuts to federally funded programs. We've got Chad Troutman in studio, who's owner of ChiliTrout Farm in Burlington in Kane County. And Ben Felder's on the phone. He's editor-in-chief of Investigate Midwest. That's a nonprofit news outlet that reports on agribusiness. So, as I mentioned there, Ben, farmers aren't only confronting bird flu, tariffs and the end of USAID, they're also creating a lot of uncertainty here. So talk to us about how the Trump administration tariff policies are impacting farmers in our state.
Yeah, so many will remember during Trump's first term, tariffs were a big tool for the president, and trying to lower costs for exports. And the prices that went up during the first term was really because of retaliatory tariffs from other countries like China, who were responding to our increase in tariffs by increasing their own. I think the big hit for farmers as we see a return to those policies, one is the increase in costs that are imported into the U.S. It's impacting everyone, including farmers, whether you're buying animal feed or, parts for a tractor or machinery or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other big thing that has farmers really worried is just what this is going to do to the price of grain. A lot of grain that's produced in the U.S., including 44% of that that's produced in Illinois, is sold as an export. So as the president implements new tariffs from other countries, including China, and threats against Mexico and Canada, the concern is about retaliatory tariffs, and what that would mean, not only in the increase of the cost, but also big customers like China who may shift their buying to other countries.
Yeah.
We saw that during the first term of the president, in which soybeans, for example, China is the largest buyer of soybeans from the U.S. And as those costs were going up because of increased tariffs, they were shifting their buying to countries like Brazil and buying more of that. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that while that shift happens, it doesn't necessarily shift back when tariffs go back down or when policies change. Those markets are sometimes lost forever. And so a lot of the gains that countries like Brazil saw in selling soybeans to China during Trump's first term remained even when he left office.
Interesting. Yeah, another executive order impacting farmers is the elimination of the U.S. Agency for International Development. Now, Chad, USAID doesn't come into play with your small farm business model, but does it impact any of your farming neighbors in rural
Absolutely
Kane County?
It does. Absolutely, it does. $2 billion worth of grain products alone go to USAID from U.S. farmers. There's read recently that $4 billion total from U.S. farmers goes into USAID. So, because it is such an important program for spreading democracy throughout the world and maintaining our allies and fellow democratic governments, not having that hurts both the farmers and the countries it's going to dually. But the neighbors, they don't as much bother them about what it does with the food, but just that it is being bought by the agency.
Yeah.
And that's really troubling on these guys. And then also USAID does, and things like the Farm Service Agency, which has been cut drastically as well. They do things like conservation programs and a lot of things like that. And both conservation, no-till, low-till type services.
Yeah.
And underneath the previous administration, those farmers that engaged in a lot of those projects, they were said they'd be paid for these projects, and then those payments were halted. And that's causing a lot of guys to be deathly afraid, that I've heard from personally with my own ears. Some 5- and 6-figure dollar amounts that were promised to them that they signed contracts for. And then now Trump has stopped those contracts from being paid, even though it's already signed contracts and things like that. And that has them very nervous.
So lots of uncertainty around that federal funding that
Absolutely.
for some has already been lost.
Yeah, because you do the work first and then you get paid later. Well, they've done the work. They're not getting the pay.
Ben, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I think just the uncertainty about federal funding as a whole. I mean, we saw a couple of weeks ago the administration try to halt a large amount of that funding, and that was paused by a federal judge. But just the uncertainty of what that means. I mean, farmers received more than $10 billion in direct government payments last year. And nearly half of that came from conservation programs, like was just mentioned.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even include the federal crop insurance program, which is another kind of $19 billion. And I think those conservation programs are really critical to a lot of farmers on the ground. And some of our reporting in recent weeks has looked at, these, we're talking about billions of dollars. That's a big price tag. But when you look at local communities, those 5- and 6-figure projects, they maybe don't catch our attention like the billion-dollar figures, but are critically important. Whether you're putting in new drainage, systems or other infrastructure that the local farming community is really relying on. And a lot of that stuff takes upfront cost. Some of the projects that we've explored, local communities have already put up, thousands of dollars for engineering expenses, legal review, with the promise that the federal government is going to help pay for all, if not a large part of the project. And that uncertainty is just really kind of creating a lot of worry, a lot of fear moving forward.
Yeah. So a federal judge Thursday ordered the Trump administration to temporarily pause the freeze on all funding of USAID programs. Give us the very latest, Ben.
Well, the latest is we're still waiting on a final decision on that, or where that's going to go next in an appeal. But it was such a large order that there's some confusion on whether or not the administration is actually following the judge's orders, because we're already hearing about some programs that are being paused or delayed or pulled back. And even if it's a temporary pause, that means a lot of these local communities are having to float some of these expenses. And it's not just the funding. I mean, we've been, you were talking earlier about just kind of the loss in federal employees, and we're seeing large we're already starting to see kind of massive firings and lots of offices that handle some of these payments. So even if the funding is technically still on, having the federal employees to help process that funding to be delivered is also causing delays.
So the president's threats of mass deportations, that could also cause problems for farmers, right, Ben? What are you hearing from farmers?
Well, the agriculture sector as a whole relies greatly on foreign workers. Now, that's not just a lot of times undocumented workers get a lot of attention, but a lot of these workers are visa workers that are legally allowed to be here in the country. And so there's still some confusion about kind of what the future of visa programs will look like under the Trump administration. I think the big thing to look at going forward is as the president has tried to make a big show of force and going after undocumented residents here in the country. So far, that focus has been, and this is not the greatest term to use, but kind of the low-hanging fruit. A lot of those that have already maybe been arrested or currently incarcerated and county and state facilities and deporting those individuals. But when you look at the numbers that the president has said that he wants to deport, the only way to achieve those numbers or to even get close is to go well beyond those that are the quote unquote criminals, the ones
Yeah.
that have already been arrested. That's going to mean uh, immigration crackdowns in ag communities and in communities with meatpacking facilities as well,
Mm-hmm.
where you do see a lot of these workers. And so I think one big thing that's going to be interesting to watch is how does the corporate agriculture community, the meatpacking companies that largely supported the president, how are they going to respond if and when they start to see their own workforce impacted by this effort?
Yeah. Final thought from you, Chad. What are you keeping an eye on for your farm?
For my farm personally, keeping an eye on the near future, and that is just keeping it avian flu free. Beyond that, I'm interested in the bigger and larger picture too,
Yeah.
because of course that affects me directly and indirectly.
Oh, yeah.
Even down to the small business loans that are available through Farmer Service Association agency rather. And numerous other things. But also you want to see your neighbors do well. It's one of the things that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And when I know that they're hurting and they're frightened and, these aren't people that are usually quite easily scared. They're roll with the punches. We just had 3 tornadoes last year right in my neighborhood,
Yeah.
So they're used to.
There's some resilience there.
Yes.
They're used to bouncing back.
Yes, they're used to bouncing back
Yeah.
and they're used to adversity. But this one is a whole different type of thing. And a bunch of these guys
Yeah.
voted in that direction, so they're confused and feeling betrayed. And
Yeah. Well, best
things
of
like
luck
that.
to you. My thanks
Thank
to
you.
you, Chad Troutman, owner of ChiliTrout Farm in Kane County, and Ben Felder, who's editor-in-chief of Investigate Midwest. Thank you both.
Thank you.